Hello to everyone. Today I will be presenting my analysis of a significant Supreme Court case, Wisconsin versus Yoder, which was argued in 1971 and decided in 1972. This case stands out as a key moment of the US constitutional law, especially regarding to the free exercise clause and the balance between religious freedom and state educational interest. My name is Maria Paz Moreno, and I will walk you through the background of the case, the legal issues it raised, and the court's ruling. This case involves the following parties. The plaintiff was the state of Wisconsin, and on the other side, the defendants were Jonas Yoder, Wallace Miller, and Adin Jutsi, who were all members of the Amish community. According to the rules in the case, the state of Wisconsin was enforcing a law that required all children to attend school until the age of at least 16. The state argued that mandatory education is essential to prepare citizens to participate fully in society. On the other side, Yoder and the Amish parents believe that sending their children to public high school after 8th grade will go against their religious beliefs and traditional way of life. They argue that such education will expose their children to values that conflict with their Amish faith and threaten their spiritual well being. Let's start by understanding the situation that brought these issues to the court. In this case, we are looking at Amish families in Wisconsin who refuse to send their children to school beyond the 8th grade. They believe that continuing formal education will go against their deeply held religious beliefs, and they fear it will expose their children to values that could threaten their path. Because of Wisconsin compulsory education law, we require children to attend school until age 16. The Amish parents were found guilty of violating the law and were fined $5 each. The key issue here is whether enforcing this law against the Amish parents violates the free exercise clause of the First Amendment, which protects people's right to practice their religion freely. The main question to solve this case becomes: does Wisconsin compulsory law violate the free exercise clause when applied to Amish families who refuse to send their children to school past 8th grade for religious beliefs? Before answering the question and getting into the case, I will explain the procedural history of the case. After the Amish parents were fined for not sending their children to school, they challenged the law in court. The case first went to a trial court where the judge ruled against the parents, upholding Wisconsin compulsory education law. The parents then appealed to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, which reversed the lower court's decision. This time, the court ruled in favor of the parents, recognizing their right to religious freedom. Because the case involved a significant constitutional issue under the First Amendment, the U.S. Supreme Court agreed to hear this case. Now let's explore this case. It concerns the free exercise clause of the First Amendment, which protects the right to freely practice one's religion. This is highlighted in the very first line of the clause, as you can see on the slide. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion of prohibiting the free exercise thereof. According to it, Wisconsin compulsory education law indeed violate this protection by forcing Amish parents to send their children to school beyond the 8th grade, something that directly conflicts with their religious beliefs. The U.S. Supreme Court agreed that the law placed a heavy burden on the Amish way of life and their ability to follow their faith. So the core legal issue became: does the state law go too far when it interferes with someone's religious practice? Now we are gonna see the arguments presented by each party to solve this case. Both sides presented strong arguments. Let's start with Yoder and the Amish families. They based their arguments on the violation of the free exercise clause. They explained that their religious beliefs prohibit formal education beyond the 8th grade. They believe that this exposure to high school environment could introduce values that go against their faith. They also argued that forcing their children to attend to high school will endanger their spiritual salvation and break the community of the Amish lifestyle. In their community, children receive vocational and moral training outside of traditional schools, which they believe is more aligned with their faith and prepares them well for adulthood. Although the fine was only $5, they felt it represented a much deeper violation of their religious freedom. On the other side, now looking at the state of Wisconsin position, the state argued that it had a compelling interest in ensuring that all children receive education until at least the age of 16 to help them become more productive members of society. They were concerned that making exemptions for certain religious groups might weaken the overall public education system, and the state also claimed that no group should be above laws created to thrive um, in society. Now let's discuss the analysis that led the court to make the following decision. The US Supreme Court ruled in favor of Yoder in a 7-0 unanimous decision, supporting the Amish families. The court found that Wisconsin compulsory education law was unconstitutional when applied to the Amish community because it violated their rights under the Free Exercise Clause. One of the court's key arguments was that there was not clear evidence that stopping school after the 8th grade harmed the Amish children or threatened society. In fact, their community continued to provide meaningful vocational and moral education outside of public schools. This decision highlights an important principle. When a religious belief is honest and not harmful to others, the government cannot interfere, even if it has a general law like mandatory education, like in this case. I agree with the court's decision because even though Wisconsin had a law requiring children to attend school until the age of 16, this law went against the Amish families' religious beliefs. The court recognized that forcing them to follow the law will have deeply affect their way of living. So, despite the state having an interest in education, it was not strong enough to override the Amish families' constitutional right to practice their religion. The court's decision protected the fundamental right to freedom of religion, and the Amish families weren't trying to harm anyone. They simply want to raise and educate their children in a way that match their religious beliefs and traditions. And the state goal of requiring education until the age of 16 is important, but in this case, the Amish provide their own form of education that prepare their children for life within their community. And that's why I think the governments should not force people to go against their honest religious beliefs unless there is a truly um, urgent reason. In this case, that urgency didn't exist, so the court made the right choice by putting religious freedom above general law. In addition, now I want to talk about a case that introduced an important legal principle used later in Wisconsin versus Yoder. And discussing this case, we can have a better understanding of why the Amish families won the case. Um, this early case is Sherbert versus Werner, decided in 1963. It involved Adele Sherbert, who lost her job because she refused to work on Saturdays, which is the Sabbath in her Seventh day Adventist faith. When she applied for unemployment benefits, the state denied her, saying that she wasn't available for work. Sherbert argued that this punishment violated her First Amendment rights, especially her freedom of religion. The Supreme Court agreed, and this case led to the creation of the Sherbert test. According to this test, the government cannot limit religious freedom unless it has a compelling reason, and even then, it must do so in the least restrictive way possible. This same legal principle was later applied in Wisconsin versus Yoder, when the court ruled that the law placed too much pressure on their religious beliefs and that the state interest in education was not strong enough to override their freedom, especially since the Amish had their own way of educating their children. In both cases, the court made it clear religious freedom can outweigh general state laws when those laws place a serious burden on honest beliefs. And in addition, state interests are not absolute and must sometimes give way to fundamental rights like freedom of religion. That's why the Amish families won the case, and it's because the state was violating the right to freedom of religion, which is protected by the First Amendment. This case had a big impact on the law and society. First, it strengthened the protection of religious freedom, showing that the government can force people to go against their beliefs without a very strong reason. Second, it helped to launch the modern homeschooling movement. The court recognized that families, especially religious ones, could provide their own form of education outside of public school system. In addition, it set an important precedent for how courts balance the power of the government with the rights of individuals. It made clear that individuals' rights, like freedom of religion, can outweigh state laws in some cases. Finally, this case has been used as a reference in many future cases, including those about religious objection to drug laws, vaccines, education, and more. It became a key example of how the Constitution protects personal beliefs even when the government has different goals. Thank you for your time and attention. I hope you enjoy my presentation on Wisconsin versus Yoder and gain a better understanding of how this case shaped the balance between religious freedom and government authority. If you have any questions, I will be glad to answer them. Maria Paz Moreno.